This is our Global Taipei Dialogue IX, and tonight we are focusing on the nexus of environmental governance and soft power. But before we begin, I would like to spend a few minutes introducing our foundation and the work that we do. Taiwan Next-Gen Foundation is a policy think tank and an education foundation that was established in 2016. We operate under our mission to make Taiwan a more sustainable, diverse, and inclusive place. We are a fully bilingual organization with diverse staff coming from 6 different countries. And our research is split into 2 parts: research endeavors and public programming. So allow me to begin with the former. We have 3 research pillars: Taiwan's soft power, the program that brought us all together here tonight, research on Taiwan's new southbound policy, which is President Tsai's flagship foreign policy initiative aimed at diversifying Taiwan's foreign relations beyond the infamous Taipei, Beijing, Washington triangle, and the 2030 bilingual country plan. Next slide. We also have robust public programming, like the program that we are putting on tonight. So on top of our monthly Global Taipei Dialogues, and we are so very excited to start getting ready for our 10th round number Global Taipei Dialogue in May. We also carry out service learning projects where we invite our guests to get their hands dirty and experience very tangibly the concepts that we talk about through our programming. And also a program series, Next-Gen Voices, which are a series of various youth empowerment endeavors. And we actually have a service learning project coming up this Sunday as a follow-up to this Global Taipei Dialogue. So on Sunday, May 2nd, we will travel to Shaowen Beach and Danshui for a beach cleanup. So if you are interested in joining us during the beach cleanup, during our service learning project, feel free to talk to me or any of my colleagues during the intermission. We still have quite a few spots left for this free and very engaging activity. We have carried out those service learning projects all around Taiwan. Taiwan Next-Gen Foundation really believes in the evolution of resources beyond our capital, Taipei, and we maintain strong relationship with our partners in the government and non-governmental sectors, particularly in Jiai County and its vicinity. Speaking of the Next-Gen Voices program, we focus on cultivation of soft skills among Taiwanese youth and encourage young Taiwanese scholars to become a part of amplifying Taiwan's voice on the international stage. A part of our program was a 10-week critical thinking and writing skills workshop, focusing on cultivating young talent in public policy and diplomacy. We were able to bring some amazing speakers from both Taiwan and overseas. But of course, our flagship public program is our Global Taipei Dialogue. Global Taipei Dialogues events are always free, open to the public, and bilingual, carried out in Mandarin and English. Of course, we would not be able to do it alone. It always takes a village to achieve anything, so just a few quick words about our partners. We actively collaborate with 9-Line, which is a European foreign policy publishing platform that is currently in the process of conversion to a think tank. We also work with Lead for Taiwan, and let's give a shout out to our Lead for Taiwan partners who I'm seeing in the audience right now. Lead for Taiwan is a fantastic organization set up by young Taiwanese scholars, most of whom have been educated overseas and who want to bring various concepts of more holistic education back to Taiwan. They're doing great work, and we are so very happy to support them. And this is just a selection of a few of our partners. Now, if you still don't follow us on social media, feel free to take up your phone and connect with us on any of the platforms listed on the screen. I still see some people scanning, so I'm going to give you 5 more seconds to complete that. And if you like what we see, you see tonight, if you decide that you want to support our mission of making Taiwan a more sustainable, diverse, and inclusive place, please consider making a gift. We accept cash donations and bank transfers, and my colleague Alice, who is working at the station outside, will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Guanting Chen, the Chief Executive Officer of Taiwan Nation Foundation, who will share a few words about the rationale behind putting on this fantastic event we have for you tonight.
首先非常感谢，接下来我要用中文，因为我们看到还有很多我们台湾的这个参与者。那首先先感谢大家的参与。这一次的全球台北论坛是谈到这个软实力，还有的环境治理。其实过去的每一次，我们每一次的台北论坛都是针对一个事情，就是 sustainability， 这是我们的一贯的主题。怎么样可以确保永续经营这个国家？这个社会，不管是人或自然科学上面领域，怎么样做才可以让我们理念相近、价值相近的这个国际伙伴们能够支持我们？如果我们没有办法把这些声音传出去的话，那会十分可惜，因为我们share共同的价值观。其实大家会觉得说，软实力，什么是软实力？它不见得是透过军事，它不见得是透过经济的这种传统的方式去让别人听我们说话，而是用我们的魅力。用我们治理的方式，或者是用我们的价值观，用我们的影响力，去让世界听我们的声音。那这一个部分，在今天的这个论坛里面，3位老师都会跟我们分享这个环境治理的做法。我们怎么做会影响到世界各国对我们的看法？软实力的展现，环境治理的方式的展现，也是一个非常好的方式。这是一个非传统的安全的方式。每一件事情都是连结在一起的。如果我们回想这个过去的这几年，气候变迁、极端气候影响到的是世界上每一个国家，贫或富。当然，它影响到最剧烈的就是发展中的国家，太平洋的国家。而这些太平洋的国家刚好都是我们的友邦，有直接的外交关系。如果我们要跟全世界说台湾 can help， 那我们就要证明台湾可以在这个议题，台湾 can lead。能够领导这个部分，这也是为什么我们今天邀请到几位教授、博士，还有这个社会的影响者来参与我们这一次的盛会，让他们透过他们的语言告诉世界，我们是代表什么，我们什么样的价值 ，What we stand for 这样子。那再次感谢林宗仪博士，还有这个马奈德先生，还有这个Kim Shuk先生来分享我们的这一次的论坛。接下来我要用简单的英文讲稿，因为我看到有一些这次参与者也是很多来自各国不同的人士。As a leader of an international mighty think tank, I also wish to point out that environmental governance should be viewed as a key pillar of modern-day society, modern-day security framework. Severe challenges to security arise from the so-called non-traditional security threats, including climate change, cross-border environmental degradation and resource depletion. If Taiwan wants to remain serious about amplifying its voice within the Indo-Pacific, we need to start paying closer attention to environmental governance. How we respond to the climate crisis is not only a part of our soft power projection, but also a more comprehensive smart power approach. Thank you all so very much for joining us this evening. I look forward to a fruitful discussion. 谢谢各位，谢谢。
Thank you so much, Guanting, for your thorough introduction to our event. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker of tonight. Dr. Zhongyi Lin is a professor and chair of the Department of Geography of National Taiwan Normal University. He is a globally renowned specialist in the field of coastal management and has carried out fieldwork not only in Taiwan but also in other Asian countries, including Vietnam, which I, for one, find very interesting in the context of our work on the New Taiwan policy that we carry out at Nation Foundation. I very much look forward to learning more from Dr. Lin about Taiwan's 2015 coastal management law and its implications for Taiwan's soft power. Thank you so much, Dr. Lin.
So welcome everyone. I think as we announced, this event will be bilingual, so I think I was the one to represent it Mandarin speaking, right? So as I was speaking Mandarin, but I think luckily I prepared my slides in English, so you can read it. But after in the discussion section, we can still ask questions in English. OK， 大家晚安哈。那我想今天讲是双语嘛，所以我就代表讲中文的哈。我想其他2个中文应该没有比我好。那我现在在师大的地理学系来服务哈。那我今天要讲的题目是要来介绍大家一个我们算是一个非常新的一个环境的法案，叫做海岸管理法。那在介绍之前呢，我大概先给大家看一下我的背景我基本上我是一个地质学者我是地质学家，然后我也研究这个海洋我也是一个海洋学家，所以最后走到最后我就研究海岸那现在呢，这个只是要告诉你说我怎么成为一个地理学家从 geologist and oceanographer and combined together and become a geographer. And 然后我在学校里面教的课，包括了地质学地形学、海岸环境那还有环境的变迁等等。那所以我今天主要的因为我一辈子的研究主要就是在海岸的环境里面包括这些所谓的 Barrier Island 海外的沙洲岛还有这个 Coastal Dune 海岸的沙丘。那这个还有海岸的一些灾害、海岸的这个管理的部分，所以这是我的大概所谓的教学跟研究的兴趣。那这边几张图片大概就是刚刚介绍到的我在过去8年呢，我们有机会到越南、到印尼参与合作计划，然后实际到这些地方，不只是带学生去野外的实习，然后我们也做研究上的一个合作，所以我们希望就是过去我们在台湾走过的路，一些经验能够提供给这些国家，因为他们现在经济在发展当中经济要起飞，那尤其在海岸地区，它可能很多的这种观光的发展在开发，但是这么多的开发案有没有必要，或者是恰当，或者是说怎么去规划，其实有很多的问题。那我们希望也许台湾的经验可以给他们一点这个帮助。我一开始讲说，我们今天要讲的是海岸管理法，有多少人听过海岸管理法 ？You heard this before? Just few of them. OK. 这个是海岸管理法的，这个是一个算起来算很新了但是什么时候颁布发行这个海岸管理法？在2015年2月4号这个政府正式颁布这个法律。但是在这个法律颁布之前呢，其实花了25年的时间在做准备。也就是说，这个是内政部来主导的一个法案那从起草第一个first draft 25 before this so it takes 25 years to have this law come into force. 那在没有海岸管理法之前呢，其实台湾的海岸呢，其实是讲起来说很多人在管很多人在管比如说这个渔业的资源，或者是森林的防风林的这个建设，这个是农业这个叫做什么农委会然后这个其他这个所谓防灾那当然水利署，那就有经济部，所以都是来自那各自各有定的自己的法规那就是没有一个整体的管理的概念，没有一个就是综合整理的概念，所以才会有这样的一个新的法案出来强调 那个综合管理的这种概念。那在这个海岸管理法里面呢，第一章的第一条，就几乎把这个为什么要设立要通过这个海岸管理法，它的一个那个理念，它的一个理想，它的目标已经很明确的去表达出来。那这边中文也有英文，那基本上就是很重要，就是目标就是说要维护一个自然系统，海岸的自然系统，然后确保自然海岸零损失，自然海岸不要再不见了因为你们如果有机会看过一些文章，可能你可以了解到，台湾现在所谓的，如果光是用海岸线的长度去做比较的时候，有一些人工设施建筑在海岸线上的，已经超过50%。比如说50%，如果你把它算成是人工海岸，那剩下45%的自然的海岸，所以我们已经没有办法再损失更多了那在这个法案里面大概有强调，就是说要因应气候变迁那气候变迁这件事情。因应气候变迁，防治海岸灾害跟这个环境的破坏防止海岸灾害、环境破坏，然后保护跟富裕这个海岸的资源，推动海岸的整合管理，这刚讲那就是，但是最终的目的当然就是促进所谓的永续发展，海岸地区、海岸地带的永续的发展。那光是一个法，当然没办法做任何事情所以需要有一些详细的根据这个法律去定出一些计划、执行的计划那所以一开始大概从2015到现在6年的时间，大概整个花在哪些事情呢？第一个就是我们去写出了一本海岸的整体管理计划然后呢去定出来这个所谓的海岸的这个保育计划，海岸的保育计划。那讲到保育这2个字，实际上是保育什么？保育这个环境，保育这个所谓重要的地景，保育所谓的生态的系统保育的生态的资源。那另外一部分，第3个部分呢，就是强调的是所谓的海岸的防护计划，一个是保护，一个是防护。保护是保护环境，保护动物、生物、生态；防护是什么？防护是来防止人跟人的财产的损失。所以这个叫做海岸的防护计划，一个是保护计划，一个防护计划。那最重要的是这个，就是说，我们定这个海岸管理法，其实并不是要把海岸戒严，所以告诉你说，什么事情都不能做。而是要有效合理的利用海岸资源，而不至于对环境造成很大的伤害。所以就需要一个所谓的海岸管理利用的一个方法那因为我们知道，在过去当各种不同的部门在管理海岸的时候，其实等于是没有人在管等于是没有人在管。当你有很多单位都在管的时候，没有人管。那这个计划就有一个核心的一个所谓管理单的一个法源的依据那在这个内政部营建署就成立了一个所谓海岸管理委员会，来审理什么？审理所有的开发利用的案件你要在海岸做任何开发的行为，比如说你要设立风机，或者是要盖个什么样的一个港口。或者甚至于大家知道这个要盖一个天然气的接收港等等，这些都需要经过一个所谓海岸管理的一个委员会来审理然后当它通过，当然审理就是看你这个开发有没有必要性，有没有的独特性等等这些需求所以这个是一个法律的一个主要的一个架构那我今天特别要来介绍的是关于这个海岸防护这件事情I'm going to talk about the coastal protection plans in this coastal zone management act。那海岸的侵蚀的问题我这边简单就是拿了2个台湾的，上面是台湾的图，底下是这个越南的图。这个主要就是要告诉你说，所谓今天海岸的侵蚀、海岸线在消失、海岸线在后退这件事情呢，并不是只有台湾独有，而事实上是全世界其他很多的地方都在发生这样的事情。那在这个传统上面，台湾过去面对这个海岸侵蚀的问题，大概传统有几个工程上的做法，盖海堤、盖这个所谓的凸堤，还有做这个所谓的离岸堤那这些都是一些工程的设计，用水泥、用消波块去试着去阻挡海水侵入来，进到陆地来但是这些方法过时了吗？或者是说适不适用？其实我们可以看一下，来讨论一下。其实就是说这些工程过去台湾大概就是主要一讲到灾害，海岸灾害就是这些工程在做每一年可能变很多的预算尤其是台风过后又会有一些特别预算，几百亿在投入但是这个它真的能发挥功效吗？其实我们说，通常这些硬体结构呢，不管你再怎么设计的多坚强，其实都会，只要一个够大的浪，够大的台风来，往往就破坏掉这个是海洋大学的一个海堤那这个是高雄的这个旗津的海岸，那这个是台南的，有很多在真的强风大浪来的时候呢，其实是挡不住的这些水泥结构其实也挡不住，那要花很多的钱。那刚刚讲到这个3个这种传统的做法，其实就是说，它本身原先设计的目的是要去保护海岸，可是我们实际看到就是说，它反而去它反而会造成一些所谓在结构物的附近会有一些侵蚀的现象就是大家可能听过所谓的凸堤效应一个港口或者是建设出去了，那原来这边的沙滩呢，就因为那个自然的输送的系统被阻断、被干扰，所以那个沙滩就慢慢不见，因为没有沙进。那这个是它的一个负面效应。那除了这个传统的办法之外呢，我们有什么办法去面对我们知道说，这个传统办法其实并没有办法去解决所谓海岸的这些灾害的问题。我们要做海岸的防护其实光是靠消波块是做不到。那有什么替代的方案？那过去开始就有一些学者可能他会提出一个所谓的软性的工法，刚刚那个是叫做硬性工法就是水泥很坚强的。那这个软性工法是什么？就是说像是这个从这个我们叫做养滩你这个地方海滩被侵蚀了、消失了，那我从外面去借一些沙子回来把它填在这个地方去做养滩做 called beach nourishment kind of a soft engineering approach。然后另外呢也可以建议，就是说做一些这个所谓的沙丘的重建、沙丘的富裕，因为沙丘事实上是在海边海滩的上再内陆一点会有一个天然的沙丘，那这个沙丘基本上跟这个海岸大概就成为平行那它就形成一个好像是天然一样的海堤一样当然它会吸收波浪的能量，它会保护海岸。所以如果你有这样的一个环境，但是你因为人为的疏忽，沙丘不见了，那我们就可以用这种方式，就是把这个沙丘重建回来。重建回来之后 就可以，它就有它的功能啊。好，那除了所谓硬性跟软性的工法之外，啊，还有没有其他的方式？那这边是我要提的，就是说，其实我们还有一些所谓非工程的解决方案，也就是说，属于这个所谓比较从环境规划、环境的治理的这个面向来讨论，我们怎么去面对，怎么去因应。那这边讲第一个讲的这个 case 叫做 retreat 啊，那就是说放弃啊，先放弃，那就是像这个房子，它本来盖的地方，它就离海岸有一段距离，但是现在海岸线上海水面上升了，海岸侵蚀了，海岸后退了，那这个房子变成这个样子，那你要怎么办呢？就认了，把它放弃掉啊。那我人可以移动，人往后迁，这个方式啊，这叫 retreat。那其实还有其他的方法啊。这个第二种就是说，比如说像这个是很有名的一个 case， 这个在美国的北卡州有一个 Cap Hatters， 这是一个最高的北美洲最高的一座砖造灯塔，对美国人来讲很有它的历史价值，所以当它这个海水侵蚀到它的基座前面的时候，大家就开始在讨论要怎么办那最终他们是选择了把整座灯塔很重直接往后搬到后面去那搬到后面去可以做什么？至少保200年的平安这个意思好，下一张。那另外大概我们可以做的就是既然我们已经预知了未来海水面要上升，这是气候变迁教我们的事情气候海水面要上升，那我们是不是在所谓的国土规划，在那个我们更了解这个海岸的动态性之后，我们去把这个规划出来一个所谓的，你要叫它缓冲带也可以，或者我们称它叫后退带 （setback zone）。就我在一定的范围之内，离海岸线一定的范围之内，我把它报为所谓的后退带。在后退带里面呢，我就不要去做重大的投资，我不要去在那边盖一些豪华的旅馆，那我将来就不会损害就没有那个损失如果只是一个天然的环境里，没有这些人为的，没有人住在那里，没有人的那个投资财产在那里，那海水上升了，海岸后退了，那就是一个自然现象，也不会有灾害的发生。这个照片是，这个照片是一个很特别的一个海岸风机的例子。这个风力发电机在当年站起来的时候，说是1支1亿，对，但是站了不到1年，花在保护这个风机的钱2300万，就是不断的海岸侵蚀了，然后你为了要保护这一个它不要倒掉，不断的用各种方式去尝试去挡，但是挡不了，没有用。那这2张照片呢，其实是越南的开发在一个世界遗产的小镇惠安这个地方。那我刚刚讲因为观光在发展，所以很多的这种所谓度假村别墅啦，就是盖了很多沿着海岸线。但是你看它有什么保护？没有，几乎没有薄了墙。那这是在2015年一次台风之后，有一个度假村就被垮下去了就整个地基被侵蚀掉。那这个是在它附近大概150公尺到200公尺的地方，另外一个度假村。那它那时候2015年呢，它还在建造当中。他看到这个现象，他只是暂时停动。2017年我们去的时候，它就盖出来了。他完全没有学到任何教训完全没有学到任何教训。OK。那我们说这个我现在用一个例子来说明说，其实 海水面在上升，海岸线在后退这件事情，其实是可以被预知的，可以被预知的。那我们刚刚一开始有提到一个所谓的沙洲岛，海外的沙洲岛，这个在台湾的西南部从浊水溪以南一直到台南，有一系列的沙洲岛。那这些沙洲岛本来是冻的，它事实上是冻的环境那随着海水面上升呢，其实海滩原来的海滩在这里，随着海水面上升，新的海滩会在未来海水面上接触的地方，会有一个新的海滩出现。那在后面的这个所谓沙丘呢，它也会移到一个新的位置。那这张图也就是说，告诉你这个海岸的环境呢，不会因为海水面上升而消失，只是海滩在移动，沙丘在移动，海岸线在移动。如果你没有这些房子，比如说我们这里就预先画了一个后退带在这里，我不在这边盖任何房子，那海水面上升就海水面上去了，其实海滩不会消失。但是今天如果我在这边是盖了一道堤防，那大家可以想象是什么样的结果？海水面到这边是碰到堤防了，可是海滩就不见了。OK。那这个是在台南外海西湖外面的一个岛那用20年的时间来表示它的一个变化，1996、2006到2016年那我们看到的一个现象是，整个这个离岸的岛不断的在靠近，因为这是一个移动的沙洲的沙子堆积起来的岛，所以它一直在随着海水面上升，一直在往陆地来移动。那问题出在哪里？问题就出在这里。这个是一个固定的，现在盖了一个很强的海堤。那其实，在盖海堤之前，它其实没有它是一个晒盐的地方，它是一个矮的土堤。那如果说你不盖这个水泥的堤防，其实海水面就让它淹进来也没有关系。那这个西湖就还会保留住。那现在因为这里是盖了这么强的一个堤防在那里，那海岸这个沙洲岛一直靠近，所以大家担心的是什么？大家担心的这个西湖呢，面积会越来越小，越来越缩小。那西湖其实是生产率很高的地方，很多的科架在这里面那高生产率，那今天如果说这一段这个全部消失了，将来只剩下一小个区块那这个就是我们要特别去注意那所以我最后大概简短的时间做个结束很重要，所以我讲3次这个海滩在移动 ，beaches are moving 那不要再去把那个海岸线绑死了就是让这个海岸线也跟着让它自然移动不要再把海岸线绑住。所以我大概就有机会我会不断的在各种媒体去讲这个事情。那这是2015年的时候，内政部营建署所希望我们所谓的海岸的研究者能够给一些这个对海岸的一个所谓的期许，怎么样是一个永续的海岸那大概那时候就因为字数也比较限制，所以我就很简短的写了几个要点第一个，司法自然治理原则，永续保护意识目标防灾不只是要打，你也要知道适度的后退。观光旅游呢，要重视到生态环境尽量减少人为干预然后维持那个自然作用，可以作用，自然作用维持，那你没有人为的设施，没有人为的干预，其实整个环境景观也能保持，所有的生物也都能够受益那以上是我的简短的报告。
谢谢林老师今天晚上跟我们来听的报道。Thank you so much for your thorough presentation for us tonight, Dr. Lin. And give me just 1 second as I switch over the slides. And I would like to also invite our second speaker to the stage. It's Nate Maynard. He is a senior consultant with Reset Carbon with very extensive experience working in different fields of environmental management in Taiwan. Something that I thought was particularly cool about your bio was your experience in Kenlin National Park, so I would love to talk to you about it later. But on top of that, he is also the host of an award-winning environmentally focused podcast, Waste Not, Why Not? And I very much look forward to his presentation on supply chains, waste management, and Taiwan's soft power.
Thank you, 谢谢。大家好，晚安，大家好。I am unfortunately not going to speak Taiyu tonight or Mandarin. Now that I work in the private sector, I'm too busy to even translate my slides. So sorry, I'm going to use English. But if you listen to my podcast, I also speak English. This is the first time I've spoken in a public room in a while, and since then I've changed jobs. I used to work at the Zhonghua Jingji and Zhuyan. I talked a lot about garbage. I talked about how Taiwan is great for waste management, and I wanted to combine that with the work I'm doing now about carbon and renewable energy, because when I was first asked, so thank you again for asking me to speak, and when I first saw the prompt, I was concerned because I think Taiwan has a lot of great soft power plays that it can make. I don't know if the environment is one of them, so I'm going to elaborate on that. I can just do this. I'm a control freak, I'm sorry. I like to walk around too. So this is me, this is my bio, this is the show, Waste Not, Why Not? It's a sustainability science show. I talk a lot about trash, I interview people. I think there's some people on the show who are even patrons to the show. I also work at a company called Reset Carbon, which was established in Hong Kong in 2009, and we do sustainability strategy and consulting for large corporations, large corporates in Hong Kong, like Swire and TR. We help do their carbon goals and science-based targets, and we also have sort of supply chains that we work with, especially textiles. And in doing this work, and in being in Taiwan, I've realized that Taiwan is a very special place, but there's some things that they don't tell you right off the bat. And as I was making this PowerPoint, I had to keep changing it because of Earth Day and all the announcements that kept occurring. So Taiwan might be potentially setting a carbon target for its country, which would be net zero by 2050. China, Japan, South Korea have already set these targets, and the US is setting one, so Taiwan is now officially behind in terms of setting a carbon target. Whether or not any of those are achievable. Oh, and just by the way, I'm assuming everyone here is on board with the science of climate change and the environment. I don't have to explain that, because I'm not going to, so I'm just going to keep going. So Taiwan has this really powerful carbon target, and if you've been in Taiwan for the last 6 or 7 years, you'd be impressed by the amount of renewable energy that's been added into Taiwan. When I first came here 7 years ago, there was no renewable energy. And I was at a Fulbright presentation. We got to actually speak with President Ma. We asked him what his greatest environmental achievement was. And he said, I put solar panels on Taiping Island. Okay. Not a political comment, just an environmental policy observation. And another environmental policy observation is that Taiwan has extremely high carbon emissions for the size of this place and the amount of people that live here. And if you compare it to similar economies, Taiwan's carbon emissions, this is in million tons of carbon, is a continuing increase. So Taiwan has carbon emissions of around 250 million tons per year. And in terms of electricity usage, Taiwan is about double the electricity of Thailand, half the electricity usage of Germany. This should make you a little concerned. If you know how big Taiwan is, you know that Taiwan is mostly mountains, and you'll see that if you look at per capita emissions, Taiwan has incredibly high per capita emissions. I think it's like something around top 20, it's hard to beat Canada and Australia and sort of the Gulf states, but Taiwan's competing. It's no South Korea, but Taiwan has very high per capita carbon emissions. And I wanted to mostly use graphs today because I don't really make PowerPoints that often anymore. I normally just talk into a microphone, but I wanted to have graphs that anyone could access. So you can go to the Taipower website at any time, and you can see exactly how much electricity is being generated from different sources in Taiwan. And if you do that on any given day, it'll probably look exactly like this, because you'll see that coal, and natural gas are the vast majority of Taiwan's electricity. And that's just electricity, that's not energy, which I'll talk about in a moment. And if you want to learn more, I highly recommend checking out the RE100 Market Report Briefing on Taiwan. And I think the author is in this room, but that was from my old work at SEER. They provided these lovely graphics. And you can see that Taiwan in 2019 set a renewable energy target of 20% and a natural gas target of 50%, which at the time was thought to be absurd. There's many reasons why that's the case. One is that Taiwan has no natural gas, so it doesn't seem logical to make your primary source of energy something that you do not physically have and have no expertise in exploiting. So there's that, and also 30% target of coal. I'm probably not going to talk about nuclear tonight, but we can talk about it later. And if you look at renewable energy in Taiwan, you'll see that for some reason waste is included, and wind and solar are kind of there, and hydro is also there, but hydro's been around the whole time. And you might be thinking to yourself, why are you talking about all this renewable energy and carbon stuff, Nate? Well, because the world's largest governments and now companies have all set renewable energy and carbon targets, specifically science-based targets. And a lot of those really large companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, all have operations in Taiwan. In case you don't know, TSMC is the primary chip maker for Apple. Apple has set a renewable energy goal. They've set a carbon neutrality goal for their supply chain, and that means that TSMC has had to start buying renewable energy. And not only has TSMC started to buy renewable energy, TSMC itself has joined RE100 and committed to use 100% renewable electricity. In case you don't know, TSMC uses between 5 and 10% of Taiwan's electricity. So this is extraordinary, earth-shattering news that TSMC announced the same day as their record profits. So I don't blame you if you didn't hear about it. So this is happening. This is a real soft power opportunity for Taiwan. Taiwan is a major manufacturing supply chain hub for the world that produces a significant percentage of the world's microchips and a significant percentage of other really important things like functional textiles, chemicals, etc. And as this key supplier, Taiwan has an opportunity to show the world that it can make green products with renewable energy. But the problem is that for Taiwan's entire industrial history, that's not how things have been done. Taiwan has prioritized cheap, stable electricity. And if you look at energy, and this is confusingly kiloliters of oil equivalent, which is quite easy to convert into megajoules, which you can then convert into carbon emissions with an emissions factor. But the point here is to show that this is raw energy, not just electricity usage. And when you look at this, and many people are surprised, you can kind of realize that the vast majority of energy usage in Taiwan is industrial. And in fact, everything that we do in our daily lives just counts up to, residential? 7% of Taiwan's energy is just people. Charitably, if we include the service industry within that, it's about 14%. All of the other energy is for industrial development. 70% around, I haven't checked the number lately, but the vast majority of Taiwan's GDP is export-based. So obviously exports in Taiwan bring us a lot of things we enjoy, great infrastructure, nice government funding things, but there are drawbacks to this. So whenever we're talking about sustainability in Taiwan, soft power, energy, renewable energy, it's an industrial conversation. And that's extremely difficult because we are not going to be allowed in the room to have these kind of conversations. So that means that we need to have a different strategy when we're thinking about how to reduce carbon emissions in Taiwan. And I also, because I'm nice, included carbon emissions by sector. And you can see here that the industrial sector is 6 times the size of almost any other source of carbon emissions in Taiwan. And if you would look up a list of carbon emitters in Taiwan, it would be Thai Power, state-owned enterprises, and large technology companies. So we have a very serious challenge in Taiwan of heavy fossil fuel usage, almost no energy efficiency, almost no clear electric vehicle policy plans from the government. There's no Green New Deal type of legislation that Taiwan has that I'm aware of, although I do know that there is conversations. Obviously the carbon target is a good sign. But I don't, and this is something that people ask me a lot when I was talking about waste management, is Taiwan sustainable? And I don't think you can really make that argument. I think that if you look at a country like Costa Rica, You look at even a country like Germany or Japan, you could make the argument that because Germany and Japan have energy efficiency, smart grids, they're investing in microgrids and how to transfer renewables and do energy storage, you can kind of make the argument that they're going in that direction. But there's very little that's encouraging right now about what Taiwan is doing for kind of a long-term sustainable development plan. But I'm not that pessimistic of a person, because when I came to Taiwan, things were very different. And Taiwan has a history of rapid change. And the thing that inspired me to stay in Taiwan this long was trash, was garbage. When I first came to Taiwan, there were no garbage cans and there were no litter. And the recycling rate in Taiwan now is far higher than it is in California, where I'm originally from. So I wanted to understand why that was the case. And there are many different reasons, but the most important and interesting thing to know is that right after martial law ended, 1987, 1990, the collection rate for trash in Taiwan was only 70%, which is today the exact same in Manila or Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. That means that 3 out of 10 pieces of trash do not enter into a formal waste management collection system. And the reason that Taiwan was able to make so much rapid change in just 20 years to go from being one of the, a very bad polluter with a poorly functioning waste management system to becoming literally a world leader in recycling is because of protests. It's because people fought back against landfills that the government was building, they fought back against waste incineration, and then eventually the government was forced to develop recycling policies. So in my previous role, I would go around Southeast Asia and I would talk about how, hey, Taiwan's a really interesting model. Island country, and within 10 years was able to stop the bleeding from its waste management problem. And then in another 10 years, Taiwan increased its recycling rate to one of the highest in the world. So that's pretty encouraging. I'm gonna take a sip of water and let you look at this picture. So this is what we think about Taiwan today, but this was not always the case. And I think that's really striking, that there are people in this room who grew up with Taiwan having a very poor waste management system, and now it's normal to stand outside your house listening for an ice cream garbage truck to come. And that's a tremendous amount of effort. It took a tremendous amount of political will and momentum, and is relative to building solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, a much more difficult prospect to accomplish, because you need to talk to 20 million people and make sure they know how to sort their garbage. That's a crazy achievement, which is why I brag about it all the time. And I talk a lot about this, so I'm just gonna breeze through it quickly, but Taiwan was successful because it did 3 things simultaneously. Taiwan educated everyone about the importance of waste management, there were legal penalties for people who violated it, and most importantly, manufacturers were forced to pay into a recycling fund to develop waste management recycling infrastructure. And those 3 things were done simultaneously. Most parts of the world do 1 or 2, but they don't do all 3 together. And when they do, they're successful. So, and this is sort of used to be my favorite graph, because I came to Taiwan here. So it used to be my favorite graph, and the longer I've stayed here, the worse the graph has gotten. And I think that that's also a lesson. Essentially, you can see how over time Taiwan's recycling rate increases and its waste generation per person per day. So this is personal waste. Just a quick reminder, industrial waste is actually 70% of Taiwan's waste. Municipal waste is just 30%. But still, we started to lose progress. Starting around 2017, the waste generation rate started to increase. I don't know why. I don't know anyone who knows exactly why. I assume it's because Taiwan's economic growth is increasing, online shopping, Uber Eats, unrecyclable waste is increasing. It's probably a variety of factors. It's probably not one thing. And this graph also isn't as bad as it looks, because just the scale is crazy. This starts at 0.8 and then it's 1.15. So don't freak out too much. We're losing ground, but it's not the end of the world. And there's another lesson in that for soft power, which is just because you solve waste management once, doesn't mean you're gonna solve it forever. So I have that little interlude because I like talking about garbage, but let's get back to energy. If you look at what's happening in terms of global supply chains and global carbon commitments, and maybe you're cynical and you're like, I don't really care what companies do anymore, but they're mobilizing billions and billions of dollars for renewable energy in a way that's never existed before in human history. You have Apple, who has about 2.2 terawatt hours of electricity usage globally, making Foxconn and TSMC, who have 4 times and 6 times respectively the entire electricity usage of every Apple. So imagine every Apple store, imagine every Apple office, all their electricity usage, their servers. TSMC uses 6 times that amount of electricity, and TSMC is basically just in Taiwan. So that should give you a sense about how big TSMC is. And because Apple has required Foxconn and TSMC to use renewable energy and to effectively decarbonize their supply chain, this is having a profound effect, not just in Taiwan, but also in China and regionally. And we're seeing this because also just this week, TSMC announced that they're going to make their suppliers use renewable energy. So now we have Apple making TSMC use 100% renewable electricity, and now TSMC is making its suppliers use renewable electricity. So this is, I'm normally not that optimistic of a person, but this is generally good news. And this is an extraordinary opportunity for Taiwan because you have some of the most well-funded, internationally relevant industries that are basically in allied countries hoping that Taiwan will start using renewable energy. So this could be an amazing soft power achievement for Taiwan. All of the incentives and all of the factors are there. But we're still here. We still have all this fossil fuel. We have an entire grid that's set up around fossil fuels. And we have very unscientific public discussions about renewable energy, I think is the polite way I can phrase that. In Taiwan, there's very strange binary conversations of we should either have nukes or gas. Okay. There's more to it than that. But I don't have that much time, so this was just sort of an overview, and I wanted to just essentially lay out a couple things. The vast majority of Taiwan's energy usage is industrial. However, there are major factors occurring internationally where major companies are requiring renewable energy and carbon offsets. And Taiwan has a history of radical change. Taiwan was under martial law, and we would not be able to gather like this not that long ago. Taiwan didn't have a healthcare system. Taipei didn't have a metro. These things change quickly, and people forget that. So, yes, it's challenging. Yes, there's, how do we do it? There's so much solar, I can't figure it out. That's true. But if there's a place that can figure it out, it's probably Taiwan. And one more little anecdote. So when I worked at SEER, we would have journalists come because we would, talk to them about the environment, circular economy. And we had this thing called the Green Trade Product Office, which promoted green products from Taiwan. We had all these journalists come, we presented the green products, and we showed them the energy graphs, we showed them the coal. And the first question that a journalist asked said, so you just make green products with coal? And I think that this is a really serious risk for Taiwan. Is Taiwan making green products with coal, or is Taiwan going to be making green products with green and clean energy? So, thanks. If you want to hear me talk more, you can subscribe to my podcast, Waste Not, Why Not? Open your phones and subscribe. You can follow Reset Carbon on LinkedIn. We don't really do very much yet, but we will be doing that more, and you can add me on LinkedIn, and I sometimes post things. So, thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I guess we'll do this at the end.
非常感谢马先生那么多方面的报道。Thank you so much for touching upon various issues in environmental governance in your presentation today. 然后我们现在准备聆听第3位讲者的报道。Now let's move on to the third presentation of tonight to be delivered by Tim Schutz. Tim is a PhD researcher in anthropology at the University of California, Irvine, and currently a visiting researcher in the newly established International College of Innovation at the National Jingzhi University. Thank you, Tim.
Well, thank you, Margin, very much for the invitation, for everybody for coming up. Let me see if I go the first one. Thank you. I can do it actually. I also like to walk around. Yeah, so thank you very much. I'm super honored to be part of this event and be the third person to provide I think what will be kind of a case study for us to think through, because I focused right now very narrowly on one particular company, a very important company, Taisu Formosa Plastics. So you're going to hear me talk about that a lot. But I start, and I'm going to talk about a particular project that I've run with a lot of great people here in Taiwan, which is creating a digital database that connects activists and advocates in different sites where Formosa Plastics is operating in the US, Taiwan, and Vietnam. So I think there are lots of opportunities to talk about environmental governance and soft power there. A little bit about myself. Well, I was it was funny to hear that I think my name in Mandarin Dimu has some similarity to Earth Mother or something like that. My friend told me, so I thought that would be is interesting. Well, I'm an anthropology PhD student at University of California, Irvine. I have a background in media and communication and science and technology studies, which is studying the sciences and technology from the social perspective. As an anthropologist, we ask, how do people make sense of something like environmental harm? How do people deal with living in a fence-line community next to a petrochemical plant, like in Taiwan or in the US, Southern US in particular? And I'm a visiting researcher at NCCU right now, at the International College for Innovation. Just a little bit, how did I get to this research? So I've always been very interested in how people use data to make environmental problems visible. Because for most of these problems that we see in the presentations, we need graphs and we need different kinds of data to make environmental harm visible. Here's just one example. And things like the right to know, for example, that has been huge. Knowing what kind of emissions or toxic chemicals are actually being emitted from factories. Going back all the way to the Bhopal disaster in 1984 in India, one of the world's probably worst industrial disasters, that launched, ushered into a new era of open data and right to know legislation around the world. And what you see here, for example, is a map of Louisiana's Cancer Alley, stretched between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, that has over 200 petrochemical factories, mostly built on former sugar plantations, on slave plantations. And you can see that each of these circuits is the blast zone of these factories, so the area that would be affected when these things blow up, which they do. And speaking about coastal erosion, again, we're on the Gulf Coast, so this, I forget the numbers, how many football fields Louisiana is losing per day to coastal erosion. So, so I'm interested in the people that make these kind of visualizations, that use them, how do they use them, etc. And when I did this research in the US, when I moved to California and we did field research in places like Cancer Alley, I learned about Formosa Plastics, that Formosa Plastics was coming to town, or planning to come to town. They already have a facility in Baton Rouge, but now they want to build, here it says 9.4 billion, I think now it's more like $12 billion plastics complex in Cancer Alley. Many of the residents who are Black and African American who live there, who are very often descendants of the enslaved from sugar plantations, they don't want Formosa Plastics in their neighborhood. They already have borne their share, so to say. So I became very interested in that, how that's going to unfold. So I learned about Formosa Plastics, and the interesting thing is, once I came to Taiwan, I learned that almost everybody has some kind of connection to Formosa Plastics because they're so integral to the economy, to how the country developed. I'm sure some of you have maybe relatives or friends working there. But I'm just going to say it's one of the, it's one of the sixth largest petrochemical company in the world. Very important in Asia, but operating in China, in Vietnam, in the US. Operating not only in plastics, even though the company is called Formosa Plastics, but they actually have like 14 sub-companies and work in medicine, they run a hospital here, etc. So they're a really big business. But they also have this really harmful track record of environmental problems. So everything from explosions in facilities that are increasingly aging here in Taiwan, to water pollution both in Taiwan and in Texas, but we're going to look at the Texas case. And I think this is pretty well known here. In Taiwan is a fish kill marine disaster that happened in 2016 in Vietnam, caused by a Formosa steel factory. So even that kind of opens a whole, another can of worms. But that's, I think, the challenge, keeping a company like Formosa Plastics, keeping all these moving parts in view. So just, again, a little bit of backstory, just to show you why I think this is an important case for how Taiwan is being received abroad. If we talk about soft power, so this is all about Cancer Alley. Right now there's a campaign to start, to urge organizations not to invest in Formosa Plastics. So, for example, Norwegian Bank of Norway has pulled out some of the money that it had invested in Formosa Plastics because of human rights violations, I think in Vietnam, but they still hold a lot of, they still invest in Formosa Plastics. So this is going on. The Biden administration now, with this really, kind of like Nate was saying, that this rush of kind of change in investment, new infrastructure and so on, they've actually started referring to Cancer Alley for the first time, and they've kind of taken note of this new investment. But many residents, they also kind of worry and say, well, we've been saying this for 30 years. Are you really going to do something? And here's a report by the Institute for Energy Economics that just came out that basically say Formosa Plastics in Louisiana is a bad idea. Not just because it's environmentally unjust, it would harm people that have already been harmed, that suffer from asthma and high cancer rates, but also because of the shifting demand for plastics. We can go into that maybe in the Q&A, but lots of new capacity in China going online. China is right now a big importer, but also with the trade wars, where they keep importing from a place like Louisiana. So they basically say it's a bad idea. Don't invest in this plant. And I don't have a slide for that, but actually right now the plans are being delayed. So the protests have been successful. Right now they're reassessing whether they should build in Louisiana. And here's another example. This is in Texas, so just a couple of hours drive from Louisiana. Diane Wilson, a former shrimp fisher woman, fourth generation shrimp fisher, who has been fighting for Formosa Plastics for 30 years, ever since they came to Texas in the 1980s. And this shows that data is data of different kinds, very important. By collecting these plastic pallets over many, many years, 5 years they've been going out in kayak, they managed to show that Formosa Plastics is releasing this every day, over decades into Lavaca Bay and Cox Creek. And the problems with these plastic pieces called nurdles is they absorb toxic chemicals. So there's a lot of mercury in the water that is being absorbed by these plastic pellets, and they were shrimp fishing, but you really can't make money anymore in their shrimp fishing. So I pass this around. You can take a look, and you can go out to central Taiwan and collect these pieces, just like you can do in Texas. Like what we did actually. So this is just to give you a sense of what the hell does an anthropologist do. So when I came here, I wanted to understand how have people collected data about Formosa Plastics, what are the different needs for data in different communities. So we have, for example, air pollution monitoring in Taishi Village in Changhua County. We've talked to fishermen who've been doing basically the same thing like Diane. So basically watching and resisting Formosa for many years and collecting plastic pieces. Let's take a sip of water. Yeah, so this is what I've been doing over the last 6 months here. But in parallel, we've been working with a very nice team. So this is me, and then lots of collaborators at NCCU, and my advisor, Professor Kim Fortune, over in Irvine, who's been friends with Diane Wilson for many years because they both actually, Kim Fortune was studying the Bhopal disaster, and also Diane Wilson has been campaigning around the Bhopal disaster and has been to India and has been to Taiwan. So there are lots of connections that we're kind of building on. And what we got together with Diane and thought, okay, what would a repository look like that would connect all these different sites? Because basically you have, you know, similar kinds of data collection going on, similar problems. So we talked to Diane and she said, well, I have this like barn full of stuff, which you saw in the picture. So many different documents, many different leaked reports that she has from working with whistleblowers. She has interviews with workers, newspaper articles. And we realized, okay, in Taiwan, people also have the same kind of data. So what we built was the Formosa Plastics Global Archive, which is, it's a very big project to take on for like 4 people, but it's been incredibly generative and interesting. And unfortunately, today the website is offline because our servers over in California are offline, but I'm going to give you a link where you can read a little bit more about this archive, where you can go and explore the data that is public. So in like the last few minutes, I just want to give you some examples. You know, as I was preparing the slide, like how can this archiving project, which, it feels very small scale sometimes, how could it possibly be involved in like how Taiwan is perceived abroad and like soft power issues. So again, the first thing that I think is really important is supporting a transnational community of Formosa, of residents that live next to Formosa plants. And as researchers, we got to be really humble because those networks already exist. People have been collaborating for many years. They're doing absolutely amazing campaigns. But I think this kind of data capacity and providing data infrastructure with funding by public universities, I think that's something that we can do. So this is one kind of pulling this community into visibility, because I think it's really easy to feel isolated if you feel like you're fighting a very big company. And right now there's a lot of attention on Cancer Alley. Lots of people talk about Cancer Alley. Unfortunately, also because it had the highest COVID mortality rate in the entire United States. Well, maybe after New York, but so lots of people are talking about Cancer Alley right now, but this attention is shifting. So I think it's really important to make like a durable network of people and give it infrastructure. It's especially important about lawsuits, especially lawsuits that are where the data can be published. So for example, the lawsuit that Diane and the water keepers in Texas led, she's given us all the documents, expert testimony to upload and curate, which might be able to inspire similar regulation in Taiwan, because what happened is that they achieved a zero discharge agreement with Formosa. So Formosa is supposed to stop releasing those plastic pieces, even though they don't. So they still keep polluting to this day. They're actually going to court again and kind of fighting over the, what the definition, what waste is, what counts as plastic waste. They're basically saying, oh, you have to monitor inside the company, not outside, because outside you might find old pellets, So even though this is a huge case, it's like the highest civic-led environmental lawsuit in US history, led by the crazy Fisher woman. I think more people need to know about it. And in Taiwan, you don't have any kind of regulation over this plastic pellet release. And we might be able to collaborate with similar projects because we're not the first people to collect data and try to put it out there or curate it in a meaningful way. So for example, there's Project Toxic Dogs, led by 2 researchers, historians, and public health scientists in New York. They have over like 1,000 documents on Formosa plastics, and maybe we can work with them. So I speed up a little bit. Again, we're being modest because the idea would be we can support local and international media capacity in some way, and luckily, Taiwan has really fantastic environmental journalism, Woman That Bow, the Our Island show. We've met with the production team. I mean, like Diane, they've also been watching Formosa Plastics ever since. But they said, well, for us it's really interesting because it's hard to report on Formosa because people fear retaliation. You know, it's very difficult to interview workers, for example. It's very difficult to find out what is going on in China with Formosa Plastics. And since they mostly cover Formosa locally, domestically, the archive is one way, you know, where we can kind of curate data for future episodes. And very generously, they have translated the episodes into English, so they can be shared with activists in Louisiana. And I really recommend you to, check out the episodes if you don't speak Mandarin like me, or recommend it to people who don't, who might be interested in these cases in Taiwan. There are fantastic Netflix documentaries about Formosa in Texas. If you watch Dirty Money, the show, we can talk about that. But I think this is fantastic. Yeah, and in the US it's important because you have local news capacity is just going down. And there are places that don't have local newspapers, and this is Texas and Louisiana where capacity is also going down with the media crisis. So I'm not saying that we can fix that, but this is something I want to keep an eye on. And then finally, and this is something like we're doing today, in order to make, you need to bring this archive to life. So I think it's important that we kind of stage events and workshops. And we had one very modest version of that already in Taipei in March, where we had a nice exhibition of courtroom sketches that document the lawsuit, one lawsuit in Yulin County, by a sociologist who was drawing and kind of commenting on the lawsuit, which is interesting to share once we had the translations with people in Louisiana and Texas. But also is a nice kind of civic data because usually you're not allowed to record anything in court. You're not allowed to do audio or video recording. So these drawings kind of a nice way to bring that to a broader public. Yeah, and we've also designed a digital tour. This is for students that I teach or that we teach in California. It's a digital tour that is hosted on the same platform that also has the archive, which takes students and visitors through Cancer Alley with different stops, and one of the stops is the Sunshine Bridge, where the Sunshine Project, as this new $9 billion project by Formosa Plastics is called, where we give a little bit of information and people actually can click here into the archive and explore the material. Yeah, so this is designed for students. We teach about 500 students every year at just at UC Irvine. And Formosa Plastics is one very prominent case study now, and making sure that every student learns about Formosa Plastics in the US and in East Asia. Because students also do their own case study work about the communities in California, because they often don't know what's happening in their own backyard. So, but getting a perspective about, what's the specific history of Louisiana, where you had a shift from the plantation economy to the petrochemical industry, where it's super easy for a company to come in and buy a plantation and then build a petrochemical plant. That's very particular, history to Louisiana. And students need to know that. And I just want to say, this tour we actually developed together with the Whitney Plantation Museum, which is one of the few critical slavery plantations museums that teach critically about slavery in the US. Because they don't glorify, they don't stage weddings on the plantations as many museums do in Louisiana. And interestingly, Formosa Plastics used to own this plantation. They wanted to build the world's largest rayon factory, so synthetic fiber factory, in the 1990s, but it didn't work because the market demand shifted and there was some pushback. And then Whitney Plantation bought it. They promised me that they will give me the plans for the museum that Formosa wanted to build there. They also wanted to build a museum. Okay, I'm wrapping up. Yeah, sorry, I already said this. So even though there's a zero discharge agreement, Formosa keeps polluting in Texas. Diane Wilson is again on a hunger strike, something that she's done many times before. She's on day 22 of a hunger strike, and today actually many people are hunger striking with her. Yeah, I couldn't do that for medical reasons, but I admire absolutely what she's doing. And now, just today, a new campaign started by people in Louisiana that say, you know, you can sign a petition, you know, to divest from Formosa plastics and to urge President Biden to stop Formosa plastics. Yeah, okay, I'll end here, kind of like an anecdote. We also went to the Formosa Plastics Museum in Taoyuan. I can recommend to go there. You will get a very different story. Yeah, and yeah, it's interesting. So I was just writing a piece that you can go and read, but there's this piece of wood in the entrance that the chairman, Ching Wang, that he paid for because it symbolizes the strength and the longevity of the company. So it's this piece of wood. When we translated the word burl, so this kind of wood, also means tumor in Mandarin. So I think I want to write about that in the future. Okay, I thank you very much. You can, because the platform is offline, I thought I'd just link you to an article. Maybe tomorrow morning the platform will be back up. It would be fantastic if you could go check it out, read our article, and I'm here for answering questions. Look forward to the Q&A. 谢谢, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. 我很好想都知道台塑造成的环境污染算是一个非常有争议性的主题，所以我们非常感谢很有勇敢的 Tim， 帮我们引起这个非常重要的讨论。We all know that the issue of environmental pollution caused by Formosa plastics is a very controversial one, so we thank him for his courage in introducing this important topic of discussion to us. And now, just for 5 more minutes before we go into the intermission, I would like to introduce our special guest, who is actually introducing his fantastic work right outside of our room, and I encourage you to interact with him during the intermission and also during the open networking part. Mr. Tiwari, please. Originally comes from Madhya Pradesh in India, and he's currently a Taipei-based photographer. Many of his works are actually centered around the theme of environmental governance and environmental protection. And given that India is one of Taiwan's major partners under the New South Wales policy, we believe that the conversations that you may have with him while interacting with his work may also bring you some valuable ideas about how Taiwan can incorporate ideas related to environmental governance in its soft power projection under the umbrella of the New South Wales policy. So, Maya, please.
So, hello everyone. This is a great opportunity. I'm no expert. I have seen people like presenting data and everything. I just observe things, and since I'm a photographer, I try to document them, and I try to present them to the people. So I generally do that on my Instagram because that's where most of my audience is. But I do share it on Facebook and Twitter and everywhere wherever is possible. So I generally, when I travel, the first thing which I seek is I try to see how we can see the nature in a very very natural way, and how we can admire the original beauty of the nature. So I love landscapes. I love taking pictures. I love aerial photos because aerial is something, I have a drone and I shoot by a drone. So aerial is something where we can see where our eyes cannot see. So that is the way I like to shoot things. But then when I travel across, I see very different things which are, which makes me sad even, because at the same time we are, when I want to admire the beauty of the nature, at the same time I'm like disgusted by the kind of work people are doing. People like us who go there, who enjoy the place and who litter the place. That is very, very common thing which is in India. Because we are so many people, but it's not like it's not there in other part of the world. Even in Taiwan, which is very clean place, I've seen the way Taiwan keeps its streets clean, its environment, its park clean, but still there is littering. I have seen people, I mean, I have not seen people throwing that, but I have seen the plastics available. So, yeah, something like that. So I'm gonna give some pictures which I have seen. This is, since Bhopal was talked about, and I wasn't sure if that was the topic. This is one of the picture which I like most. This is like 30 kilometers from my home. This waterfall comes only during rainy season. This is a very huge waterfall, and I don't know if I can give you the scale, but this particular tree, it's like 90 feet. And so this whole waterfall is more than 300 plus feet. That's the size of this waterfall. And this waterfall is exactly the place where we have to go and we have to admire the beauty. But then when the season goes off, if you go to the next slide, this is how the nearby area looks like. So the trees are gone. That's the area which is now, you can see, is barren land. The soil has eroded. Here they have cultivated some of the, the farms have come up. But this is also nearby area. This was forest earlier, but then down the line, it's being eroded like this. And this is a one single picture. It's not a timeline picture. It's one single picture. So when I see things like this from my drone, I feel really sad that what are we doing? So I don't know about industries and all those things are definitely affecting, but we as a human individual are also a big part of this disaster which is happening. So the next thing which I want to show is this. This is plastic wrapper of sneaker, and this place is remote and non-reachable place basically. I have to trek for 5 days in the mighty Himalayas to reach this place, and what I saw is a piece of plastic there, which is shocking and surprising and saddening at the same time, because this thing is not going anywhere from there. I picked it up because I found it, but there are so many pieces there which are not visible, which reached there, or maybe people who went there for tracking or something like that, they put it there, and it's making so bad effect that, see this glacier, this is a river. This used to freeze during this 4 months of season, but this was the peak season, and this river got broken up. This is called Chadar Track. Chadar Track is something where this Chadar River, this Indus River basically, it gets frozen, and that frozen on that frozen river people used to track. So that's a track of 50-60 kilometers where you walk over the river and reach some places where you get the frozen waterfall, you get the sea, very different landscape, very different and unique nature's creation. But then when you see these things, it affects us very badly. I have also presented the same thing in the prints outside. You can see those. So now I'm quickly wrap. Sure. So I'm quickly wrapping this. So I have just 2-3 pictures more, which I'll also explain there. And this is one of the turtle, sea turtle. You can see it's a very, it's an endangered species now, and it can be seen near Likyo Island in Taiwan. I got the opportunity to shoot it. It's very good. Fast. If we go to next 2 slides quickly. This is the day before yesterday image where I got to see the fireflies. It's a firefly season in Taiwan. If you like to see those natural beauty, please go out and see, because it's something very amazing. And then this is the last picture which I want to show. This is what I found in Taiwan. This is a part of India. So this is the kind of South India, from central to South India, which is I got to shoot. It's in the Feng Shui reservoir. So when I shot from the sky, what I saw is I can see from Mumbai to Kanyakumari. Only Sri Lanka is missing. That's what I saw. Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mayank, and I hope that everyone engages meaningfully with Mayank's work during the intermission. We now have a 12-minute intermission. We will reconvene here at 8 p.m. Just one note, when you first entered the room, you probably found this sheet, this question sheet on your seat. So before the Q&A, we encourage you to fill this in. My colleagues will collect them before we begin the panel. We will not be passing mics during the Q&A. Please write your questions down on the question sheet. 我们现在开始我们12分钟的休息时间。那你们进我们的教室的时候，应该看到这个问题表。那因为时间的关系，我们在 Q&A 的时段不会给你们 pass mic， 所以有任何问题的话，请你们填写这个问题表，谢谢。I took a brief look at the questions that you have all submitted. We have a good selection of questions in both English and Chinese. That's always great to see. Also some questions for our individual presenters as well as general questions. So I hope that we will be able to have a really meaningful conversation. So how about I start with questions which are more general so that each of you can weigh in. I saw one question that was focusing on the juxtaposition of individual action and collective action. In your opinion, is changing consumer behaviors an effective way to reduce waste and pollution? Can we reduce the overall waste production if 70% of waste in Taiwan is industrial? Would you like to begin?
That feels directed at me. So this is a constant thing. It's a constant theme in my podcast anyway, is sort of the role of individuals versus the role of sort of industry. I don't think it's binary. I don't think it's a zero sum. It's not one or the other. It's both, obviously. I think we need to do things as individuals, and we need to send messages to corporations and businesses through campaigns and boycotts, like for Formosa Plastic, for example. Because if you just stop buying something from a company, they don't know why that is. It could be the product's inferior or something like that. So if you're going to do individual actions, which you should, the point is to articulate them and communicate that, either with a group or a boycott or a larger campaign. The problem is when we tell people, oh, just use nice light bulbs and drive an EV. That's not the kind of individual action that works. Individual action is best when it's focused into a group. So for Taiwan, the industrial waste, so 70% of Taiwan's waste is industrial. However, a very high proportion of that waste is recycled. So by the government's own estimate, there's an 80% industrial recycling rate in Taiwan. That's probably not true, but it's still quite high because there's economic incentives to do that, and industrial waste is generally easier to process. That's not to say we shouldn't be worried about it, but the sphere that we can control is municipal waste. So I didn't really give you a clear answer because there isn't one, but I think that there should be more emphasis on institutions and industries and corporations rather than individuals. But that doesn't mean that you should just eat steak and like drive a Hummer and fly to Penghu every day.
Would other remaining two panelists like to weigh in on this question?
I can just briefly say, recommend to read the report that came out about Formosa Plastics, why it's wrong on so many levels. Looking at kind of the I'm still learning about like the economics and the development of petrochemicals, but what I'm worried about is that there's so much cheap gas, and that it's in some ways it doesn't even pay off to recycle. It's more lucrative to make new plastics, to make virgin plastic. So, I have a hard time, just focusing on the individual actions, even though, I echo what you said, I'm so impressed with what, the small group in Texas have done, shrimp fisher woman Diane with whistleblowers who basically, they were, when you speak up about Formosa Plastics in Texas, you're going to get fired. and they chose, they chose to speak up, and they risk their standing in the community. It's basically a company town if you live in Point Comfort, so they really put their everything on the line, and that's a really brave individual action, I think. But it takes guts, and I mean, Diane being on a hunger strike on day 22nd, she's gone to jail for this kind of stuff. So, anyways, I mean, I'm humble when I see that, but I can recommend reading the report. It's and also, I mean, how we know it's not a sustainable industry, but they keep investing, So and again, with what's going on in China now is also worrying.
Thank you, Tim. Dr. Lin, any comments on this question?
I think by the environmental agency regulation, I think for the company, for the big company, they need to have the garbage or waste treatment by some side with some special company to deal with them. So the number is coming out, say 80% or something is high, but that's just on the paper. How the companies deal with this kind of waste is the problem. They probably just dump in the area, dump out in a valley or in a wild area that nobody knows. That's the problem. Yeah, I think that's what we have to be very careful about this number. And in the Taiwan's coast, most of the landfill site, the garbage landfill site, 30, 40 years ago, they always on the so-called marginal land. The coastal area is full of this garbage. Actually, under the sand dune, a lot of the garbage there. So I just give you a case that people want to build a seawall, not to protect the people's property, they just prevent the exposure of the garbage. Sounds ridiculous, but well, it's the story.
Thank you for sharing these valuable insights on the role of both collective and individual action in different areas of environmental governance. We have another collective question. Movements like Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg claim that the existing gradual campaigns like Net Zero 2050 are not enough. We need a more rapid cut to CO2 emissions. Do you see this argument that Net Zero 2050 will take us past the 2 degree rise in global temperatures exaggerated and as doomsday-like prediction? So I think that this question also ties in with the theme of the previous discussion about collective versus individual action. What do we need to do to achieve our targets, and are our targets reasonable? I look forward to your answers.
All right, this feels directed at me again. So I was reading an article today that said that net zero has made a tremendous error and it's miscalculating the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And obviously that's true, because greenhouse gas emissions accounting, which is something that we work with very closely, is a philosophical and ethical question, because we're not going to be physically able to go and count all the molecules of the various greenhouse gases that exist. I find, however, that said, I find sort of the blaming of net zero as particularly strange, and especially like John Kerry, the US climate envoy, said recently that scientists have to stand up and stop climate denial. They've been doing that for more than 100 years, actually. And I think that net zero, just like 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, is not some sacred number, and I don't think that the scientists and researchers working on coming up with these models think that. These are attempts made by researchers to force business, which is the source of greenhouse gas emissions and industrial pollution, to try and change their ways. And as someone who consults with corporations, it's frankly much easier if there's an initiative that already exists, like net zero, like RE100, like science-based targets, to get them to change. Because ultimately we are asking them to change, but they are the ones who have the vast majority of the power. So I don't think it's that helpful to blame these particular initiatives because they're scientifically inaccurate. I think we obviously need rapid and immediate deceleration of our industrial development and carbon emissions. But it's easy to criticize and say that. It's very difficult to actually achieve that in a corporate boardroom or business setting. So that's my sort of context there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I kind of have again maybe narrow look at Formosa Plastics here, but I would closely follow what net zero means in Taiwan, how it's going to affect what a company like Formosa does. They've proposed around the new natural gas pipeline in Taoyuan. Formosa Plastics proposed that they could build the terminal in Mailiao, because they're phasing out a coal-powered plant. And I think there were conversations with the government whether that's feasible, and it turns out it's not feasible, I think, because they don't have the permits. You would need to build a pipeline up to the north. So I'm just going to say I'm very interested in what counts as transition technology, and I think gas is probably not the best one.
I think I have some other questions about if there's one day we really reach this so-called zero production, but CO2, the carbon dioxide, is not the only greenhouse gas. It's probably because and some others. We always know that the methane is coming out from the melting land, like in Siberia or some area, and a lot of a lot of other greenhouse gas emission happening now, and so even we reach the goal, we still cannot solve the problem. That's
I just want to expand on what you said, Dr. Lin, because I think that's an important point, and something I didn't touch on. Solving only climate change is not an effective solution. It doesn't make sense to only reduce carbon reduction. We should seek things that are going to benefit human societies, reduce pollution, improve our coastal resilience, do things like blue carbon, methane sequestration, and things like that. It shouldn't just only be this focus on carbon. However, it's very difficult to get people to care about the environment, so sometimes carbon is the only thing that they'll latch on to. So that's why that framing tends to exist. But I think that's a good point.
那现在我们有一个中文的问题，好像有一位来自台湾的参加者要向我们外国的讲者问一个问题。马老师、蒂姆老师对台湾目前的环境研究能够提供什么建议 ？So there's a question to our panelists from overseas, Nate and Tim. What suggestions can you offer to the current generation of environmental researchers in Taiwan?
We keep the sequence,
Yeah. 其实我没有建议，其实台湾的研究者帮我非常多。Like 今天我讨论的东西 everything I said today was because of Taiwanese researchers who taught me and told me and explained to me all these different things. And it's only because of those researchers and because in some ways I'm a foreigner that I can go and just say these crazy things like Taiwan shouldn't subsidize its electricity. The natural gas plant is a mistake because ultimately I don't have the same pressures on me as a job or as a researcher. So I'm very grateful for the Taiwan researchers to just tell them to keep keep going. And if you want to say something controversial, I'll say it. I have a podcast.
Since this question is in Mandarin, I will. 但是他不是在问我，他是在问那个外来的意见嘛，对不对？那我们现在就是说，在台湾就是我们知道在台湾有很多的环境保护的一些团体。那我们很多时候我们发现就是说，你的环境保护跟我的环境保护不大一样。好，那你要保护的跟我要保护的，其实就会有一些冲突。那如何在这样不同的一些意见里面，或者不同的看法里面去，大家能够退一步去折中一些新的一些想法出来，这个我觉得是在要让这个环境能够更好，未来能够更永续很重要。那我自己讲我自己的例子，我说我20年前我如果一回来台湾我就开始讲说，大家不要在海边盖房子啦，这个很危险啦，未来20年、未来50年这里都会被海水淹没，那谁会听我的？没有人啊。 那时候就是工程治国。我们刚刚讲到有工程治国，完全是工程的方式。在那个年代，我是没有这种话语权的，这个讲话出来是没有人会听你的。但是现在你慢慢的，我们会经过努力，不断的去沟通，不断去跟不同的一些背景的人去了解，互相了解，然后去大家一起探讨，那就有机会。大概，所以我们的环境的推动，环境治理，环境的推动，当然就是在我个人就是以自然为师啦。好，我们要去了解那个自然作用是怎么回事，然后我们来根据它的方式去调试。啊，那你比如说你知道未来海水面上升，那你就预先去后退一步去做一些准备。那做准备不是说我什么都不做，其实我们如果要国土规划，其实要做很多事情。那另外一个很重要，我刚在那个愿景里面讲，就是要保持那个维护那个自然的作用在运作。台湾西部海岸是一个沙滩海岸，绝对没有因为海水面上升到某个程度，整个台湾的海岸都不见了，沙滩都不见了，对不对？你只要让它有空间，那个沙滩会一直存在，生物也都维护住了，生态也都环境也都很好。那我就是给大家做个参考，就是一些想法。
Maybe you can translate a small part. I would also love to, we'll reply in English first. And I think I just want to say, well, for environmental researchers here, extend an invitation to join the project and help us figure out what can this archiving project, civic data around Formosa plastics, what can it be used for? What can the future of this archive be? What should we do together? I can see two things that I'm very interested in is better understanding what our data needs and strategies in different places, because the strategies used to protests that are being staged in Louisiana are probably most likely not what is needed right now in Taiwan, or what environmental NGOs are doing here in Taiwan. And I want to be both respectful and mindful, and understanding of that. I want to understand and characterize what kind of different kinds of data do you need. And just an example, in Louisiana they were using archaeological data and aerial photography to show that there are slave cemeteries on the construction site. And that's one of the main reasons why Formosa Plastics lost their permit, because people were saying you are building on sacred grounds here, in addition to destroying the wetlands and many other reasons. So I think there's specific needs and specific uses of data in different places, and we can characterize that. And the second is just an invitation. If you're teaching, let's teach together. We have what we call the Beyond Environmental Injustice Teaching Collective, which also is on this platform. Is linked to in the article that I gave you. And if you want to teach together, if you want to join this teaching network, that would be very cool. Okay. Maybe just say
yes.
They're welcome to.
So just a quick translation of remarks from Dr. Lin. Dr. Lin mentioned that even though within Taiwan's robust civil society there are a lot of environmental groups, their priorities in terms of environmental protection are often conflicting. So he's encouraging more cooperation, finding more common ground. And he also reiterated his point from his earlier presentation that we should just let nature do its thing and free the shoreline. 然后蒂姆给我们提供两个重要的建议。第一个是如果你是在台湾的环境研究员，你可以多参与一些国际性的研究案子。那蒂姆老师给我们两个例子。第一个例子是在不同国家，在不同地区，环境研究员的策略跟数据的作用是不一样的，所以我们应该多多合作，彼此交流，更好了解对方的研究项目。然后他的 第二个建议就是，如果你当老师，他非常欢迎你们跟他联络，然后一起开课。那他刚才有介绍，他们有一个老师的社群，然后通过这个社群的活动，你们就能够跟全球的同学分享你们的想要教的资源，差不多。Okay, so now moving into more individual questions. There's a question for Dr. Lin. What is the biggest hindrance to soft engineering schemes? Is it price, is it public awareness, or is it engineering? What is the biggest hindrance to soft engineering schemes?
I just give you an example about the beach nourishment. I think the problem for this soft engineering is because normally the expected lifespan is a lot shorter than expected. When we lost the sand and say beach erosion, and you try to move sand to fix it, but you may calculate, say, okay, this can sustain for 10 years, but normally one big hit by the typhoon, everything will be gone. So that's the problem always happen in the U.S. and also in Taiwan. So I did not promote the ideas of beach nourishment. I prefer use the so-called dune rebuilding approach, and if we have and that's not suitable for every place. It's only suitable for once this have been the dune, but have been destroyed by ignorance or by any other way that the dune has been disappeared, and then we have the chance to rebuild the dunes. So once we rebuild the dunes, it's become a natural barrier of the waves, of the water, the intrusion of the water. So you can have this kind of natural structure. But it's I think the way is to use the natural approach, like so-called soft engineering approach. I think the expense of the engineering project is it's very low. It's not very, but I cannot say too much about this, because when the engineering project is too low, maybe the government agency want to take this approach. Well, that's something. If you want to discuss with me more detail. 我就是说那个工程哈，做重建的沙丘重建的工程，我是在台湾唯一做过野外试验。我在野外试验，我要怎么做出这个沙丘来，然后让这个沙丘可以维持一段时间。那其实后来被破坏掉的，我做出来的沙丘后来被破坏掉是政府自己本身的一个单位啊，比如说他可能为了要种树啊或者什么，他就把它沙丘给推平，然后去种树，但是过1年那个整个树都不见了啊，那就是问题。所以那如果他没有推掉我的沙丘，那沙丘就一直还在。那沙丘是软实力，沙丘其实是一个软的东西，它的这个方法是，就是说它会用沙子本身去吸收那个波浪的能量。那你强大的波浪来了，它其实把这个沙子抬起来或者侵蚀，它就那个能量就消散掉，就不会造成多少破坏。但是等到这个恶劣的天气过了之后呢，其实沙滩的沙又会把沙丘堆回来，根本不用你去花钱再去说我这个海堤破坏掉了，我要再花多少亿 多少几千万去重建这个海堤，它自然就会回复啊。但是这个东西就牵扯到这个所谓工程利益啦，或者是这些问题。那可能就是在有理想，但是实际上很多工程不这么做，其实是有这样的一个原因啊。
There was one line in Dr. Lin's response that I think is particularly memorable. So Dr. Lin mentions that sand dunes in and of themselves are a form of soft power because they're so natural and so malleable and a force of nature. So I think that was quite beautiful. Thank you for sharing this remark. So I believe that I have accidentally put Nate on the spot a few times, and now it was on accident, and now I'm going to do it on purpose. So can we talk nuclear?
Sure, yeah. That was it. There was no other.
Yeah.
That was the question. Does whoever asked that question want to elaborate on what they mean about nuclear energy, or?
They left.
They're gone.
That was my question.
That was your question. Do you want to say anything about nuclear, or?
It just seems there's a very emotional reaction to nuclear that may be beyond the merits of and drawbacks of nuclear. So I'm wondering if you could just talk about how nuclear fits in Taiwan's energy strategy, especially given that it already has nuclear and that there's not a whole lot of space for other options.
Sure. Okay. I think then I'll explain why I don't really interact with nuclear very much. In Taiwan, when I first came here, I'm not going to say I was like pro-nuclear, but obviously anyone who works on climate change and carbon issues is aware that nuclear is a zero-emission energy. However, nuclear is also an intensely important political question because of its relationship with weapons, and there are political movements that are involved. Like in Taiwan, there's the flag, fan dui, nuclear. And I don't really engage with that because it's, I don't know if it's a relevant question for Taiwan, essentially, especially the fourth nuclear power plant. So whether or not I support it or provide any kind of research or data, it doesn't really matter. And initially I was like, oh, let's just restart the fourth nuclear power plant. And then some of my Taiwanese environmental researcher colleagues showed me that workers would urinate in plastic bottles and throw it into the cement as it was forming. And the fourth nuclear power plant has some very severe safety issues, and it's taken more than $3 billion in 2 decades to not build it. So I think that the idea of having a referendum on nuclear power is rather silly. And I think that just saying nuclear for Taiwan makes sense. That's because Taiwan developed its grid in such a way that large centralized sources of power are essentially required. So I think when there is this nuclear conversation, you kind of get forced into this dialogue that isn't really constructive. I think a better question is, how can Taiwan have a high quality of life, a clean environment with dunes and avoiding chemicals, and also still meet its needs in terms of energy? And that, to me, is what's missing from sort of the nuclear conversation. And I think also, there's just no way it's going to be built. I mean, that's the other thing. Taipower no longer wants to build the fourth nuclear power plant, and they've said so many times. If a company wants to come to Taiwan to build modern, well-funded nuclear power, I don't think there's any reason to oppose that. I just think it's very unlikely for a nuclear company to build a reactor in a way that is safe and also affordable. I think we have other options in Taiwan for reducing our energy usage. So it's like a complicated, so I don't talk about nuclear because it's like a really complicated multi-part thing, and people are just like, what, you don't like nuclear? And then that's the end of it. So I hope that was sort of satisfactory and non-answer about nuclear.
Thank you very much. We are reaching the end of the Q&A portion of tonight, but there is one question that I was particularly fond of when reviewing your submissions. And it asks, how are we going to break through information barriers between generations? People who simply don't care about things beyond their immediate surroundings. Or for that matter, the people who cannot afford to worry about things like environmental governance. Would anybody like to start, or are you keeping the order?
We can break the chain.
Break the cycle.
Break the cycle. Give you a break. No, I'm just gonna jump on it because information was in the question, and I think it's a fabulous question. And again, if you are interested in helping us with this archiving project, figure it out. You know, if you look at the website, I mean, it's mostly geared towards researchers right now, and we're trying to turn it into a community resource. Then also, how do you link it with social media and stuff like that? But something that I remind myself is of how did somebody like Diane Wilson become an environmental activist who, you know, for a long time didn't really know what was going on in her own community, who had, you know, to worry about shrimping, who was raising 5 kids. She learned about it because she read a newspaper article when the right to know legislation just came out that said, your county is the most polluted place in the United States. And in the beginning she was like, okay, you know, she was joking about it. But then she got serious and she started calling the plants, and they were like, you know, she was asking, can you give us more information about this? And the plant operator said, we're not going to give you any information on the phone, you know. They basically dismissed her, but she didn't give up. So, I don't know, I think an important message is that you don't need complete information, you don't need full information or full disclosure. Even incomplete information is enough to send somebody like Diane Wilson on her path. So I don't know what that looks like and, you know, what kind of civic data capacity do we need, but that's a question I'm interested in.
I truly don't know. I've been doing an environmental podcast for 2 years, and I've been like a science communicator for essentially my whole career, and I have no idea how to get people interested who don't care. The only thing that I know that I can do is engage with people who do care. And I think that the way to get more people to care is to expose them to nature. You take young kids, expose them to nature, they're curious. I don't think there's really a way to convince someone who's against you to even come close. So I don't try anymore, frankly, because I'm tired of explaining what global warming is. I'm tired of explaining all these environmental things. If you don't know if it's a science issue, that's fine. But I think that the environmental movement community has wasted far too much time on basically bad faith actors. In terms of breaching the generational gap, yeah, I don't know. I think one of the solutions, though, is to do what you can within your sphere to engage with your communities and networks and have these conversations, because it will only get easier. It's not like you tell someone about climate change or the environment is being destroyed and they go, oh, well, whatever. I mean, maybe some people, but in my experience, it's very, very few people. Generally, once people are exposed to the biodiversity crisis, it tends to change their life. So, yeah, I don't really have a good answer. Just make content. I don't know, make an Instagram, take photos, you know, do anything you can to create those connections.
我在教书哈，我在大学里面教书，那我在教环境教育，我在教地理的这个。那对于说这个学生如果不喜欢，他对这个我跟大家讲一个情况啊，就是像我们说这一次在推动这个真爱早教的公投的这个登记，在这个是最后几天之前，其实相当艰困，对不对？但是就是那为什么会在突然最后几天呢？一个同温层的效应，就他觉得同学都在签名，他没有签，好像很奇怪。啊，所以他就签了。那到底为什么签？他其实他也搞不清楚。啊，那所以我们其实就是在我们那个我们的地理学，在地理的教育里面，其实我们是鼓励学生去批评，去批判。但是但是要批判，其实你要有实力，你要有认真的学习过。那我们其实现在我的学生我们在做一些研究，现在很流行的一个叫 nature-based solution， 以自然为基础的解决方案，就是说环境治理，你环境要就是从这个自然为基础。那什么是自然就很重要，对，不然你空讲，你就是说，我以自然为基础的一种解决方案，所有的环境议题，我们用这样一种方式来思考。那你自然都不懂什么叫自然，那你怎么可能去解决什么问题？ 那比如说好，那我们现在学生的当然最多的问题是在于就是都听人家讲的，自己不用功不读书，这个比较大的问题。好，所以他今天听的某一方说啊这个早教是怎样怎样，他也不辨真假，他就是相信。好，那或者是说哎他听这边说这个什么能源怎么样，他也不辨真，是这个就听了就相信，那就没有一个自己能够分析去解决问题的能力啊，所以这个东西是可能对年轻人大概就是希望我们多给刺激，然后去让他去思考，然后鼓励多学习一些科学，那个所谓 nature based， 那什么叫做 nature？What's the natural process？ You have to know and you can apply the nature based solution to all kind of environment issues.
Thank you very much to our fantastic panelists for answering your questions. This concludes our tonight's program, but before we go into open networking, our Chief Executive Officer Guangting Chen would like to say a few words to conclude the program.
非常感谢今天大家的参与。Thank you so much for joining us today. As you know, this kind of events took efforts, time, resources, and I want to thank my my colleagues today for spending so much time on this event. And I also want to thank all of the speakers today to share their insight. It was excellent. That being said, we need support. If you like what you hear today, if you want to hear similar event, if you want to have similar events in the future, please definitely support us. One of our executive manager, Alice, will be taking care of donation things. So feel free to engage her in the future. Doesn't matter how much, but it does matter in a way. But anyway, but again, we want to diversify our funds. So anyway, thank you all very much for joining us today, and I would like to deliver our sincere gratitude to our speakers today. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhongyi Li. Also, thank you so much, Nate, for allowing me to put you on the spot so many times in the Q&A. Thank you so much for all your interest.